Welcome to Module 3, Time and Expense Setup. In this module, we'll cover an overview of how the workflow of the module works, as well as web apps and how to enter time in the web apps, as well as the corresponding Dynamics SL screen. We'll also talk about where the data defaults from in the data entry screens, discuss setup screens. There's alternative timesheet entry screens as well. We'll also cover expense reports, time and expense setup, and then inquiries and reporting. The first topic we'll discuss is roles, and then we'll also discuss the workflow for the time cards and expense related to the overview. If you think about your time cards and what you want to accomplish with the time cards, we want to make sure that the time cards are accurate. And we make sure they're accurate by approval workflow. And so typically companies want to have the ability to approve their time cards. So they want to be able to approve them at different roles or different individuals review those time cards. So in order to accomplish that, we need to set up roles, or we have roles that exist that help facilitate that workflow. So let's look at some of the roles that we have. We have a project employee, which is the person who enters their time card. And also, everyone who uses the web apps is a project employee entering their time and or approving their time. We also have a project manager who has the ability to approve line items for their time, for time that is charged to their projects. We also have a project executive, and the executive has the ability to see all projects, regardless if they're the project manager or not. And we also have the role of a business manager, which does not have approval rights necessarily, but has the ability to see the costs on the projects if desired. There's a workflow that we have related to time and expenses that are available. We have really 4 options. And so the first option is the most simple path, and that is the employee enters their time card, and then the accounting team submits it. So if we look at our chart here, we have the role going across the top: employee, project manager, supervisor, and accounting team. And then we have the activity that they'll be providing. They're submitting a time card, they're reviewing a line item, or they're approving the entire document, or approving or posting the whole document as well. And then I included the location of where this occurs at. So you can see many of these options occur in web apps. Employee submits their time card, manager reviews the line item, the supervisor approves the document, and then the final step is within Dynamics where it's posted. And then I also mentioned if they're required or optional. So let's go through this chart and identify how this works. So in all instances, the employee would submit their time card through the web app. And then we have the ability to, then the shortest path is that no one else looks at it and our accounting team posts it. So that happens in Dynamics. And once it's posted, the project totals are updated. The second option is, well, we want our project managers to have the ability to review those before they're posted. So in this instance, the employee would submit their time card, but the project manager would review their line items. And once all the line items are reviewed, then accounting posts it. There may be a situation, though, where we really don't want the project manager intervention, because sometimes it's difficult to get the project managers to do that process. And so we want to skip their role, and we just want the supervisor or my supervisor to review the entire document. So instead, the employee submits their time card, and the supervisor approves the entire document within web apps, and then again, accounting posts it. And then the fourth option is the simplest of the most complex, is that it includes all those options. So I submit my time card, project manager reviews the line item, the supervisor approves the document, and then the accounting posts it. One of the things related to this process, though, is what happens if we reject it. So at any point in time, the project manager could reject the line item, the supervisor could reject the document, or accounting could even reject the document as well. So if it is rejected, it would go back to the employee, and that employee would resubmit their time card, make the edits first, then resubmit it. If it applies to a line item review, then the project manager would again review that specific line item change. The supervisor could review the document, and then the accounting could post it as well. When we make corrections, also we'll come back to it later, if we get through that entire process, then if it's already been posted, then the path would be we'd have to do a time card correction, and we'll discuss that later on. So once the time card is rejected, the employee can re-edit and submit it. The last point on this slide says the time cards can show as commitments. So anytime a time card is in process, it will display as a commitment on the project. So let's look at this from a graphical perspective for the workflow. So on the left-hand side is creating the time card, as we mentioned, with the employee, and they set it to completed. And we have the same workflow for expense reports too, so both of this would apply to each. The project manager can review the line item. Again, that's optional, and that's on a per project basis that we define that. The supervisor approves the entire document, and then the accounting team approves it or posts it through the time review and approval screen. So at any point in time, if it's rejected, it would go back to the employee through the red arrow represents that, and it would go back through the workflow again. However, if the time card has already been posted, then a correcting time card would need to be made, and it would go back to the employee, a new time card, and then we can go back through the same exact process. Once the time card is finished, and then it's available for allocation processor to be run, which we'll be discussing later, and also billing. So the time card being approved and posted by the accounting team is the key to the rest of the process being available to them. We also have two other processes that are available for time cards related to workflow, and one is GL labor posting. So the approval of the time card and posting of it updates the project cost, but that does not impact general ledger. So if we have to run GL labor posting to have it flow back to GL. And if we want to interface with payroll and generate a payroll check from it, we would use pay labor interface as well. So those are additional postings that can be done. Let's review some of the web apps that we can use for the time entry and approval. So we'll talk about the time card entry, the expense entry, and the time and expense approval, as well as time and expense correction. This is my web app, and this can be entered on, the great things about web apps is that we can now enter these items on any device. So we can enter it on a tablet, an iPhone, iPad, Android device, it doesn't matter. We can also enter it on the web internet if we have access to the internet. So regardless of the device, we should be able to use this web apps to enter our time and also review the line items and the documents by the supervisors. This is the menu that we'll see in the web app. So you can see, depending on what your role is, if I'm a project executive, I'll have project analysts available to me, or if I'm a project manager, because I'd be able to see my totals on my projects here. Also, the approval page is only available to supervisors and approvers or project managers. So my basic time card entry is here, and I will have the ability to see my current time card as well as any other open time cards and a time card history. So let's look at the current time card and see what choices we have. So you'll see here, this time card right now has 2 projects on it. The first one is Northwind Trade, and this one is City Power and Light. And I already have, I could hit a new item, and I'll show you that here in a minute. When we enter the time card, we'll have units per day, so I can enter time for any day of the week. I can also enter comments related to those hours as well. So if I click on the comments button, I can enter any kind of invoice comment, and that's available to show on the invoice if desired. That's a workflow decided later, but these are available to show on the invoice. I can also enter overtime hours or non-billable hours as well, and enter my comments. So here's my invoice comment here, and we can then accept or change that line item, and it takes me back to the time card. So here's my comment for my invoice. So documentation for project management. And I can save that comment or cancel it, so I can save it over here. If I go back to the time card, I can do that for any other day of the week as well. And I can see a running total of my hours for that project for that time period. If I can save this, and I can go back then to if I want to create a new line, I can click New. And you can see here I could choose the project that I want to charge my time to. And I can also choose a task. And we can control which items they see in their project and task list, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, but we can restrict it to certain employees. We can also see the labor class in the company and the account and the sub-account. Most often we will hide these fields because we really prefer that the employee is not choosing which GL account it posts to or the sub-account. You can see we also have union reporting available as well, so we can enter a union code if desired, certified payroll, all those types of things. For this example, we're just going to enter it directly to the project and task and not have any union reporting. So once we finish our time card for the period, and usually it's a weekly period, we would change it from in process to completed. So as long as it's in process, the employee can change that time card lines and add new lines whenever they like, but then once they've changed it to completed, it's finished. Now let's go back to our list and see. So I don't want to save, I want to cancel my changes and I'm going to go back. I can also see open time cards from other periods. So let's look at this one. And this one has several line items on it as well. And it can show my hours overall as well as the period hours that I've entered time for that period. And I can also see my time cards from previous time cards. So you can see here that this was a time card that's in a completed status, and this is a time card that's been posted. So if it's completed, it still needs a review and approval by my supervisor or the project manager, but once it's been posted, this time card is finished, and I can't make any changes to it. I can also see different actions up here. So if I click on the actions, we can duplicate or we can correct time cards as well in this screen. Now, if we go back, I want to show you also the expense entry. So if we think about when do we want to enter expenses? Expenses are related to most often travel, but it doesn't have to be related to travel. We actually can enter expense reports through a web app for purchases we make for the office, and we can charge them to the cost accounts for office supplies and get approval and go through the same workflow that we have related to actual project costings. We can generate travel and expense reports for internal projects, external projects, billable projects, non-billable projects, whatever types of projects you need. So let's look at the expense entry and see. It's very similar to the travel or the time card entry in that we can create a new expense report, and I can enter. When I'm entering an expense, I have the choice of 3 different kinds. So an expense report literally is I went out and I ate at a restaurant and I want to record my expense for that restaurant. Or I can enter in advance. I know I'm going to be traveling and I want to submit in advance and I want them to give me money up front so that I can pay for my expenses as I go. Or I want to do a repayment. I've received an advance in the past and now I want to I need to give that money back because I didn't use all of it. So let's look at the expense report and how that would work. So the document date, I can choose whatever document date I want, and again I can do in process or completed. Once it's completed, I cannot edit or change that document, and then I can just add new lines. So if I let's just do a new one here, and I can choose again the expense type. So client reimbursable expenses, and I'm going to choose the project, City Power and Light, as well as the task, deployment. And again, I can see the company, the sub-account, the payment method. I have choices on payment methods. I have employee paid, or I can have a company paid. And you can have unique company paid ones, and I'll show you where to set those up. But we can have a credit card set up for each individual employee if you have multiple credit cards. If I want to enter mileage, I could put in the number of units, and it would default to the rate per mile if I had chosen mileage. In this instance, I just want to enter the amount that I paid. So $700 for travel. And we also have the ability to associate it to a currency. So if you travel to a foreign country, you could choose the currency that you purchased it in, and it would convert it to US dollars for you at the time. I can link and attach notes. I can attach a new note, and I can also attach my receipt. So I can, if I want to take a picture of the receipt and attach it through my phone, I can, because the picture would be on my phone already. So I could browse to that picture and then link it to the web app, so that way I can have my receipts backings with the expense report that I submit. I can choose if it's billable or not. The manager review is determined based on how the project's set up, and so if you have line item review for the project for time cards, you would also have line item review for the expense reports as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that and go backwards here, and I'm going to go back. I can also see my open expense reports. So these are ones that might be in process that I haven't finished yet. And I can see the status of them. All these say they're in process. Most likely, obviously, we would not likely have a lot of expense reports, but if you wanted to have an expense report for each project you're working on, you could have multiple ones in a given period. I can also see my expense report history. So if I come here and I see all these expense reports that have been previously submitted, I can look to see which projects I previously charged for and the amounts that I charged for them as well. So that way I can remind myself of what has already been submitted. I also have the ability to do approvals. So we mentioned that we have approvals by the project managers and the line item review for them. So we have the choice of time and expense approval or line item approval. Let's look at the supervisor approval, since I have some of those available. So this is in my PowerPoint when I was talking. So we had the ability to go here. We have the ability for line item review here or supervisor review here. So the top line on the web app is for this document approval, and the second line is for the line item approval. So let's go look at that and see what the difference is. So this is the document approval here. If I choose the employee, I can see the employee. Here I could filter by employee, excuse me. So if I had more than one resource down here, if I wanted to filter by a certain employee, I could choose that. These happen to all be for the same employee. And you see I would have this document here. So the top part are my time cards, and the bottom part are my expense reports. And I could choose to add comments to it, or reject it, or forward it to someone else. If I want to approve all, I could do that here. Also, if I wanted to forward it here, I could choose forward and identify who I wanted to forward it to. If I chose reject, it would send it back to Claire, and then Claire would have to make edits to that and send it back to me. If I want to leave it as no action, I could do that, or if I wanted to approve. So I have quite a few choices that are available to me related to the document approval. Line item approval, the same thing. I don't have any line items, but all the projects that I would be working on, I would see those line items and I could approve those and send them on to the approver. Now, one key point is if there are line item approvals for the project manager, the supervisors will not have the ability to approve the line items until the project manager has reviewed all their line items. Now I'd like to talk about the time entry in Dynamics SL. We have time cards as well as expense reports that we can also enter in Dynamics. We also can do the review and approval, which is updating the projects. We can review the expense reports, and we can correct time cards. We can post a general ledger, and then we can also interface or create payroll batches as well. So let's look at the time card. We're going to have the same data as we would have in the web app, but we can review and edit it in Dynamics. So let's look at the project time card in Dynamics. So the same time card that's entered in web app can be also entered or edited within Dynamics SL. And I'm going to pull up the time with rate and amount entry. You'll notice there are 6 items here. The time card and the time card with rate and amount entry are the exact same screens, except that literally the second one includes our rate. So if I pull up, I'm going to pull up Andrew Clark, and we'll see our time card. And the time card, if I go to the very end, we'll see that the extended amount is $800. And so it's taking the rate of $20 an hour times the 40 units, and it's creating an extended amount of $800. Now I have the same time card that I can see in Andrew Clark. I'm in the time entry screen now, not time entry with rate and amount. And if I scroll to the right, there is no amount. I only see the units. So why would we care about having units or the amount or not? So this is intended for segregation of duties. So you might have an employee that you want to enter time cards or review time cards, but you do not want them to know the amount or the cost that the employee is getting paid. So we want to hide that or keep them from seeing it. So companies that want that level of secrecy or transparency, we don't want that much transparency. We would just use the time card entry screen. If we want them to be able to see the amounts, we would just have them use the time card with rate and amount as well. So let's go back to the time card with rate and amount, and we can see our time cards and we can edit them. Now you'll notice I pulled up one here that I cannot touch, and that's because the status is posted. And once it's posted, it cannot be changed or modified in this screen at all. I can also see the expense entries in the screens as well. So if I go to travel and expense report entry and I pull up Andrew here, we'll see that there is an expense report for him. And this is one that I entered directly in this screen. So sometimes you might have accounting folks that you need to enter expense reports on behalf of somebody else. A lot of times the executives don't want to enter their own expense reports, which is completely fine. So your accounting team can come in and enter the expense reports on behalf of executives without any issue. So let's say we have this time card and it's incorrect. Maybe I charged to, so I charged to project EN 99001, which is fine, but I meant to charge to a different task. So this time card's already been posted, so how do I fix that? We have what's called time card correction. So I'm going to correct employee E1181 for 10123. So I'm going to come over to under processes, and actually I'm going to do input, time card correction, and I'm going to choose employee E1181. And when I F3 in the list here, I will see all the previous time cards for this employee. And I want to correct this most recent one. So I'm going to click on that one. And you'll notice it has document number 10123. And I create the correction, and it will open up a brand new document for me. It looks just like the one that I had before. I showed you the screen where this one existed before. So it's going to have the same project. It will have the same task, everything that the original time card had. So now I can choose, how do I want to correct this? Maybe I should have charged it to a different task. So I'm instead going to charge it to the sales and marketing task. So when this time card posts, this correcting time card posts, what will happen is it will back out the 40 hours that it had to this original task, and then it'll put a positive number in for 40 hours for this new task. So it backs out completely the amounts that it had incorrect, and it puts a positive in for the new lines. I could also add another project and task to this if I wanted to. I could add new lines to this as well if I wanted to and submit that. So there's a lot of, the rule of thumb is you want to make the time card look exactly as it should have been submitted originally. So you just come in here and you change your time card, and whatever it should have looked like is what you will now look like as well. I can also update the invoice comments in the screen. So if I want to add or change something, I can edit additional documentation, whatever it might be, and then I can save that, okay? Once I do that, I put it in completed status and save it, and then now it continues back through the workflow. If someone had submitted the time card originally, and now it goes back through, the line items still need approved by the project managers, and the supervisor would still need to approve the entire document. Now, once I finish my time card, I can do time review and approval. And this is the part where I can post it. And so I can choose which ones I want to post and which ones I don't. If it's been approved by the project manager, it would choose approved here. If I want to reject it, I can choose rejected here as well. And once this process is run, that's when it's completely committed to the job. After my time cards have been processed, then the last step is I want to have them flow over to General Ledger. So I choose General Ledger labor posting. So why would we need a separate process for General Ledger labor posting? Why would we even want to choose that versus another process? Sometimes customers do not want their costs to post to General Ledger, and they want to handle those costs through a journal entry of some kind. So this is an optional process that you can run, but when it runs, it's going to create a batch in General Ledger with an expense as a debit, and then we're going to credit a clearing account. And the clearing account then will need to be cleared through another transaction. So if you're using Dynamics SL for payroll, once the payroll is processed, it would create an offsetting entry to take it out of the clearing account and apply it to the deductions. If you're using a third-party payroll provider, then typically what we would do is get a summary of the payroll that's been generated by that provider, and we would enter those to the clearing account instead. So we're not double costing our labor. And then at the end of the month, you'll just have to review that clearing account to see if anything's left to reconcile and make sure it's accurate. We also have the ability to generate, if we do interface with payroll, we have the ability to generate a batch directly to payroll. And let's look at that process then. So this GL labor posting posts by period. So that would send the batch to GL by period. We also have this pay labor interface, and that's what sends the batch to payroll. And we can choose the week ending date that we want to process it for, and we can choose payroll. And it would push a batch over for all the employees to the payroll module, and then payroll would calculate the deductions and generate the net pay. An alternative is that we can create an external file, dump it to Excel, and that file will generate results for all the line items of the time cards that have been entered. Then we can change that file to match the file format that the payroll provider needs. But then that file can be sent to the payroll provider, and then they can generate your payroll for your employees separately. If we do interface with payroll, there's some key components we need to make sure we understand. Specifically, there's a payroll interface tab, and this will tell us that we want to generate a batch to payroll, and it can also determine if we want to, what the earnings type would be. So is it vacation, overtime, those type of things. So this would push the batch to payroll, and then payroll will pick it up from there and generate the records as appropriate. This is a screenshot of the approval process. So some of the things that are required, this is required once it's been posted. We also can do filtering related to the approver as well. And so we can run the approval by a certain supervisor or a certain manager. After we've finished our expense reports, we need to post those as well. And let's go look at how to post those. The expense review and approval is under expense review and approval, and this will push the batches to payroll, or excuse me, to AP. So I can choose to approved or in process. I can choose to filter for completed. I can change it back to in process if I want to change something, or I can change it to approved. And once I hit begin processing, it will generate an AP batch that will have both the employee included in it, and it will put it to a clearing account as well, just like we have for the payroll or the time card component. When we post a general ledger for labor, it's going to go to a clearing account, and the clearing account is identified in the GL in the time and expense setup. So you'll notice here I have an account 5099. And that sub-account is it's referencing a mask. It's going to look at the employee sub-account. And when it posts to the GL, it will get the clearing account of $50.99 and will debit to the expense account of the employee. This is a screenshot of the interface that I showed you before. This is an example of the time and expense setup. When we do payroll interface, we can have our salaried accounts. So if it's salary, it can go to regular, as well as overtime can go to the overtime earnings type as well.